Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully people will come in as we're going along. Don't want to hold you all up that we're here on time. We do appreciate it. My name is Zakia Worthy, and I'm helping out on Parisa's campaign. And I just want to tell you a little bit about why I believe so strongly in this candidate. Last fall, I was with Gabriela Earl. We were planning a Black and Latino debate. We'll be having another one coming up for the current races, and there's a bunch of them. And she said, there's this woman who's running for Commonwealth attorney. You really, really need to meet her. And I met with Parisa, I believe maybe September, October. We sat down. Hey, Jackie, come on in. Come on off to the front. Miss Pete, come on in. We sat down, and every single thing that I believed in, Parisa hit on it. She talked about legalization of marijuana, especially with the disparity and how it's affected the African-American community, and school-to-prison pipeline, how kids have gotten locked up for a nickel bag of weed, and then they have a charge, and then they can't get a job. And all these systemic issues she went into without me having to say anything. She talked about the disparity in terms of our courts with our youth, and how she believed in restorative justice, and that when children make silly mistakes, and a lot of them are silly, that they're being charged for, it should not affect them for the rest of their lives. And so as she sat there and talked, I absolutely fell in love with her, and I let her know that I'm 100% committed and behind your campaign, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure that on June 11th, you are the person that comes out on top. So I am appreciative of everyone that came out today to hear her speak and to support her. She's a phenomenal candidate. She has a wealth and breadth of experience. And I think what I love most is that her generosity of heart and her compassion for every single person, every single case that she encounters, she looks at them through the eyes of a mother, of a daughter, of a wife, of a victim, of all of those things, of a survivor. And she's able to connect with people on another level. So without further ado, I do want to welcome Ms. Parisa Tafti for Commonwealth Attorney of Arlington.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm Parisa Tafti, and I'm running for Commonwealth's Attorney for Arlington County and the City of Falls Church. Now, the primary goal tonight is for me to not do so much talking and to listen. So I'm going to briefly tell you why I decided to get into this race, and then open the floor to listen to the community, which is exactly what I'm here for. And I'm hoping that when I become Commonwealth's Attorney, we will have these on a regular basis so that we can stay connected and stay in touch. I decided to get into this race and to run for office for a professional reason and for a personal reason. The professional reason is that as a public defender, I lost count of how many times I walked into hearings and into courtrooms and with a Black client and looked around and realized that everybody deciding their fate was white. As an innocence lawyer, I never lose sight of the fact that out of the 2,404 people who have been proven innocent and who had been convicted of crimes that they didn't commit, nearly half are Black, even though the population of African Americans in this country is only 13%. But half of the wrongful convictions that we know of since 1989 have been people who are Black. And when I look locally, I realize that the disparities are there too. That less than 8% of our county, or I'm sorry, less than 9% of our county is African American, and yet the population in our jail of African Americans hovers around 66%. I cannot look past the fact that almost half of driver's license suspensions, people who get charged for it, are Black. And I cannot look past the fact, and I want to make sure I get this number right, hold on, that in the last 2 years, in 2017 and 18, African Americans account for 57% of prosecutions for simple marijuana possession and nothing more. On a personal level, I decided to run because I have 2 Black kids. And They're both in elementary school right now, a boy and a girl. They're here. My son is going into middle school next year. He's 11 years old. And he's losing that childish cuteness. And I know that despite the fact that he's smart, despite the fact that he's compassionate, and maybe because he's headstrong, people are going to look at him differently very, very soon. And you know that they're going to look at him differently very, very soon. And as a parent, all I want is the same thing that every parent wants, is to be able to send my kids to birthday parties and to play dates and to school and to know that they are safe and to know that they are treated fairly. Now, when I first declared that I was running, I talked about the mass incarceration machine and how our criminal legal system has become a machine that's on autopilot and that grinds disproportionately people of color, that destroys communities, and that it tears apart families and it ruins lives when it doesn't have to, and when that doesn't make us safer necessarily. My opponent's response was to say, this is Arlington, not Baltimore, not Philadelphia, not Chicago. Maybe somebody thought that was subtle, but I heard the dog whistles loud and clear. My opponent has also taken offense when these disparities are pointed out. And we're told to trust that Arlington is not that way, that there are no disparities in Arlington. But there's been no data from an independent agency or organization to dispute the data that I just told you about. We're told to believe that everything is fine, without transparency and without accountability. And I'm running because I personally am done with that. So I'd like to hear from you now and to hear where you're coming from, please.
First, I'd like to hear something about your background.
Well, I've been doing criminal justice reform for 20 years. I've been a public defender. I've worked on death penalty cases. I've worked on cases that ended up in the United States Supreme Court, including a case where our client came within 10 minutes of being executed. I have been a public defender in Washington, D.C., where I worked on systemic issues to make the system more fair, including mounting an equal protection challenge when all of the juvenile girls started being sent to one judge for no reason. And that was the harshest judge in the system, including trying to ensure that there are best practices for police interrogations, best practices for eyewitness identification, best practices for forensic sciences. And I work now as the legal director of an innocence organization where I investigate hundreds of cases a year, close most of them because they're not cases of real injustice that I'm looking for. They may be injustice in different ways, but they're not cases of actual innocence necessarily. And basically investigate and prove that people are innocent and convicted of crimes that they didn't commit. And sometimes we can't do that, so we have to close the case because we just can't prove it, even though we have a firm belief about it. But I spend my days evaluating cases. I spend my days looking for truth. And I spend my days trying to make the system more fair. And I've done that for 20 years. From the moment that a good friend of mine was convicted of a crime he didn't commit, and I decided to start volunteering immediately for the San Francisco Public Defender's Office as an investigator. My personal background is... Okay. I am an immigrant from Iran. I came here when I was 4 years old. I grew up poor enough that there were times when my mother had to go into the dumpsters of grocery stores to get fruit that was bruised and discarded because we couldn't afford to go into the store and buy it. And that was despite the fact that my parents were each working 2 to 3 jobs, including cleaning my Montessori school on the weekends so that my sister and I could go to school on reduced tuition. I went to UC Berkeley and graduated with a degree in philosophy and comparative literature, and I decided to go to law school because my friend was convicted of a crime that he didn't commit. And my parents instilled, instilled 2 very strong principles in me. And the first is that, we are all children of the same God, and that if you see a problem and you identify a problem and it's within your power to fix it, you do it. And that it's your obligation to fix it.
Okay. Thank you.
How long have you lived in Arlington?
12 years.
Hi, my name is Laura Saul Edwards, and I strongly support you. I think you are the Commonwealth attorney that Arlington and Falls Church needs, so I'm hoping that you win. So what I'd like to hear is a bit of a more detailed explanation of the difference between your position and your opponents on restoring voter rights for convicted felons who have served their sentence.
Right. The first thing I want to say about voting rights is that during Reconstruction, black codes were introduced in most of the southern states, or in all of the southern states, primarily to ensure that black people remained in a state as close to slavery as possible. And that included nuisance laws, and it included disenfranchisement. So the history of voter disenfranchisement is a very ugly one, and it dates back beyond Jim Crow. Sorry? After Reconstruction. So the history of those laws was designed to make sure that people, who had been enslaved didn't have a voice, and it's perpetuated today. And my position is that people should not ever lose their voting rights, but particularly if they've served their time, that their voting rights should be restored. And I just want to make clear that restoration of voting rights is not the same thing as restoration of gun rights. And restoration of gun rights requires a separate civil court procedure where people have to apply and demonstrate good cause for getting their gun rights back. It is not the same, and it is not a direct result of curing political disabilities, like serving on a jury, like being able to vote. My opponent signed on to a lawsuit suing Governor McAuliffe when he tried to re-enfranchise 206,000 returning citizens. There was no obligation to sign on to that lawsuit. It was proceeding with or without her. There are 120 Commonwealth attorneys in Virginia. 43 signed on to that. There was no compulsion to do this, and the vast majority of Commonwealth attorneys exercised restraint, particularly Democratic ones. As Commonwealth attorney, I would support laws that re-enfranchise. I would support laws that help people maintain their franchise.
As a follow-up question to that, I've read and heard her say that she thought that it was too blunt an instrument what the former governor wanted to do, and there were procedures that had to be followed. Do you think that she had a good case there or not?
I don't. I think that the Constitution allowed for it. And that if one has a problem with what's happening, you know, if one is a Democrat and has a problem with what's happening with the Democratic governor, that one picks up the phone and calls them and helps find a solution rather than publicly opposing something that we all believe in, which is restoring the franchise. Terry.
So currently it seems to be the policy of the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, if someone has a mental health issue or is having a mental health crisis, a clear crisis where they're brought into custody, they are taken to a mental hospital where they're seen and restored. Once they come back from that hospitalization, they're requiring that they plead guilty to a criminal charge. I personally think that's immoral. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree. And I think we need to do a better job of supporting laws that allow for true diversion in Virginia. And I think that in the meantime, the Commonwealth's Attorney needs to be working with the stakeholders to make sure that we have a system that does not require people to get the scarlet letter of a conviction when they cannot be held responsible for their mental health. And I think we need to have the services in place to make sure that folks are taken care of.
Hi. I have lived here in Arlington for 13 years. I'm from a small town you probably never heard, New York City. The issue here with me has been a serious culture shock. Racism is alive here in Arlington. This is the South. What I'm afraid of is that many candidates come in to run for office, particularly in the African American community or people who look like me, and you want our vote freely. With me, it's not happening. I don't give my vote away free. I like sitting down with a candidate. The population here is only, what, 225,000 people, 26 miles? I particularly like to know from you what happens with candidates who may succeed for the office that they're seeking, that we have access to you, that it's not hello and goodbye. Too often, African Americans' votes is taken for granted. I would like to hear more of your commitment and access to you should you succeed in winning. You're running uphill against an established incumbent.
I want to thank you first, Bobby, for coming. And I couldn't agree with you more. It cannot be that politicians come into the black community, shake hands, say hello, and then only show up every time it's election time. My goal is to have regular town meetings like this on at least a quarterly basis and open to the entire county and not just located in North Arlington. In terms of access, I plan to have an open door policy. And if somebody needs to reach me and talk to me, it won't be any different than the people that I work with now. And in terms of the uphill battle, it is really hard to prove that somebody's innocent. It takes years of tenacious investigation. In one of my cases, it took 2.5 years of looking for tiny slides. And it required building a lot of relationships with police officers, with labs, with the medical examiner's office, in order to find these little slides that proved that my client had spent 28 years in prison for a murder that he didn't commit. I am used to pushing the boulder up the hill. I've spent 20 years pushing the boulder up the hill. And I will push the boulder up the hill to win the election. And I will push the boulder up the hill to identify the disparities. And I will push the boulder up the hill to create a more inclusive Arlington. That there is nothing that I want more than to connect with the community. I apologize. Anyone else?
Any questions? If you have a question, just raise your hand and one of these little sweet things will run over to you. Nicole, you have a question? All right. And I just want to say I do appreciate, I've seen, working on the campaign, her interest in the African American community is genuine. It's not just a one-time show up, meet someone, and leave. Parisa will reach back out and say, hey, can you reach back out to this person? I'd like to go by and see them again. I want to go visit their shop. I want to sit down and talk with them. It's been continual and ongoing, and that is something that we definitely know the difference when someone comes into the community and they want to connect, whether they're there just for the handshake and the photo op versus whether they are there to hear what people have to say and to learn from it, to grow from it, and to see how they can make those things better.
Thanks, Takia. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Nicole Lewis. I'm a native Arlingtonian. I grew up in South Arlington, in Green Valley, and I'm a supporter of Parisa. We helped Zakia organize this event tonight. And one of the questions I have for you, Parisa, is, so I've been called to jury duty twice in Arlington. I was selected both times to be on the jury. And when I was sitting in during the voir dire process, I was the only black person in the jury pool. I was selected both times, but I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit about that whole process and ensuring that people have a jury, truly have a jury of their peers. Like, the county is about 10% African American, but the jury pools that I sat in, and this was like 10, 12 years ago, definitely did not look like the county for sure. Thank you.
Well, I think one huge step to make it look like the county is to restore voting rights and the other civil rights that people lose when they lose the franchise, and that includes sitting on the jury. I think you also need a Commonwealth attorney that won't use preemptory strikes to make sure that the I think you need somebody who's willing to admit that there is an issue and willing to take the time to study it and willing to engage in best practices to avoid it.
So I know you spoke about, Juliet Hisney, Columbia Heights. I know you spoke about some of your experience, but can you speak more specifically to your experience in Virginia? Because I'm hearing some people suggest that you're not experienced in criminal law in Virginia.
So I've represented people at all levels of courts, including the Supreme Court of Virginia. I argued a case last November, and it just ended up with a unanimous decision proving that my client was innocent. I've practiced in the circuit courts of Virginia, and I've practiced in the Court of Appeals of Virginia. Hillary?
Poverty plays into how people are treated in the system in Arlington, from minor offenses, be it marijuana or loitering or perhaps being an alcoholic, to other kinds of offenses?
Right, so the issue of criminalizing poverty is thankfully finally being addressed. And one of the ways that it's going on in Arlington is that we still use cash bail. And in fact, when the Arlington delegation asked my opponent to exercise her discretion to stop asking for cash bail when people were not dangerous, she called that request silly and misguided. Virginia has interdiction laws, which are actively used in Arlington. And what that means is that you can be declared a drunkard outside of your presence, which then makes it illegal for you to be in the presence of alcohol, to consume alcohol. And that generally falls on the shoulders of people who can't afford to be present and can't afford to fight it, and it's generally homeless people. We suspend driver's licenses for failure to pay fines. And I think the statistic was 47% since 2012 of higher than that. What is it?
600,000 people have had their license suspended in Virginia.
Right, but in Arlington itself, it was 40%.
49.7% of people convicted of driving are suspended.
Okay. Right, so almost 50% of the folks who were convicted of driving on a suspended license were black in Arlington. And those were not for DWIs or marijuana. Those were for failure to pay fines. And so we have what, you know, a sort of, we punish people for being poor. And I think that needs to stop.
Agreed. First, I want to acknowledge that we have Delegate Lopez here. He came in a little bit later, so I just wanted to point that out. Everyone that he's here. Yes, thank you. And we have Mr. Wilson here. I'm sorry I didn't say that at the beginning, who used to be on our school board, so he's a staple in our community. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson, for coming out. And I just wanted to speak, tag team with you, briefly about the interdiction. I am a mental health therapist, and I used to work with emergency services here, and we had someone who was on interdiction, and I just want to speak to how it is such a, and the person has severe mental health illnesses as well. It is such a backwards system in terms of saying that you're here to help someone. This person had an alcohol problem, fueled by their mental health addiction. They would wind up at Arlington County. I would go over there and assess them. The jail is not equipped to handle someone who is detoxing from alcohol. If anyone knows anything about that, that's the most dangerous thing to detox from. Your organs will fail and you can die. So I'm over there trying to assess that person. The staff there is saying, we can't help this person, but they're not able to leave because of the interdiction. It's a dangerous, and it is a situation that can cause someone to actually lose their life. It's not something lightly, and it doesn't help. This person continuously cycles. As soon as they're done, they come out, they use alcohol, or even if they're just near it, with somebody near it that has a can, they get picked up and they go right back to the jail. And it hasn't done anything to help them, and they're not getting the mental health treatment that they need. So I just wanted to speak to that as well in terms of seeing firsthand how interdiction works against what it is supposed to do. Thank you. We have a question over here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Hill. I'm a member of the Black Parents of Arlington. And Parisa, I just want to get your thoughts and beliefs on the expungement of marijuana convictions, since we're now talking about decriminalization of marijuana.
I think all simple possession convictions need to be expunged. Well, while you're going to Chris, though, I want to point out that the incumbent actually, personally, last session, not this session, but in 2018, personally testified in opposition of a bill that would have expunged minor marijuana and alcohol convictions that people got before they were 21 years old. So she personally, on the part of the Commonwealth's Attorney's Lobby, personally testified opposing that.
Hi, I'm Chris, and my friend Heather here and I are leaders of a chapter, Arlington chapter of Spread the Vote. And over the past 18 months, I guess, we've helped a lot of people, mostly homeless people, register to vote, get their voting rights restored, and to get their IDs. And we've met a lot of the people who fall into your categories, not having bail, cash to bail themselves out, or being picked up for trespassing and thrown in jail. Then they lose their job, and they lose their license, so they can't get a job, or they can't drive their kids to school, etc. Do we have statistics on how many people are in that situation? I mean, how many in the jail are being thrown in jail just for these minor reasons, or for being poor because they don't have the money to pay bail, for example?
We're working on getting those, but I think, Chris, you made a really good point that, you know, once somebody is picked up for something, every single day that they spend in jail, not out waiting for their case to be adjudicated, every single day increases the risk that they will reoffend. I mean, from 1 day to 2 days increases the risk. From 2 days to 3 days increases the risk. And it's precisely for the reason that you're talking about. Because as a salaried employee, if I don't show up for work, I'm not going to get fired. My boss will wonder where I am for a day or two, but at the end of the day, I'll be able to smooth it over and I'm not going to get fired. If you work on hourly wages, if you're not in the primary job market, you will lose your job. If you lose your job, you will lose your car, you will lose your house, you will potentially lose your kids. And so what it is these nuisance crimes, these nonviolent crimes, these crimes that don't have actual victims, what they do is they expand the net that scoops people up into the criminal justice system. And essentially ruins their lives. And if you care about affordable housing, you need to care about the criminal justice system. If you care about voting rights, you need to care about the criminal justice system. If you care about education, you need to care about the criminal justice system, because these minor drug convictions, I went to UC Berkeley on Pell Grants, Stafford loans, work study, and some scholarships. I would have lost my federal financial aid if I'd gotten a marijuana conviction. People lose the ability for a marijuana conviction to receive federal housing assistance. If your family receives federal housing assistance, you cannot go back and live with them after a simple marijuana conviction. So what it does is it expands the net and scoops people up into it. And when I call it a mass incarceration machine, I am not exaggerating even a little bit.
Have a comment. Michael Moore had a film called Where Do We Invade Next that had an episode of how prisons work in Norway. In that case, people got medical aid, educational aid, and got rehabilitated to return to the society. Is anything like that happening in Arlington or Virginia?
I would say that it's happening a little bit, but we could be doing a much better job. We could get funds from the Bureau of Justice Assistance to create robust mental health diversion programs. That money is on the table to apply for, and it hasn't been applied for. We could be getting grants from foundations. Brad, no? I see somebody shaking their head back there. We could be working with nonprofits and foundations to create robust restorative justice programs, and we're not. I think that as progressive as we are, for all of the signs that we have in Arlington that say hate has no home here and everybody is welcome, we need to put our money where our mouth is. Yeah.
Hi. So when I was looking for someone to speak on special needs, I had a conversation with a gentleman who was telling me a story about how somewhere in Virginia, an autistic man who was out in the street and, can you hear me? Sorry, an autistic man who was spooked by something, was approached by police, and when the police approached him, he ended up flipping the cop and ended up getting tried and convicted, even though his reaction was typical to his disability. So I was wondering, in Arlington, do you have statistics on the arrest rate or conviction rate of people with disabilities, special needs? And I'm particularly concerned with calls to the schools. What kind of, because we get the little sheet from the police officers, but I don't see specifics, and I haven't been able to get those numbers, because special needs is something near and dear to my heart, so I really am concerned there.
Right. We're trying to get numbers. I'm not sure that we will succeed because there's a lot of issues involved in privacy and HIPAA, and it just may be impossible to get actual numbers. But I've heard a lot of stories like that, and I think what we need to do is work with stakeholders, work with schools, work with police, to really understand the various special needs and to understand how they manifest themselves so that everybody can be approached in a safe way so that our police officers are safe and so that our citizens are safe and treated well. And I think we need to, in the schools, as a general matter, but particularly with kids with special needs, need to stop treating disciplinary issues like crimes.
So how would your role as Commonwealth's attorney help with that?
Well, I would divert. Diversion would be the rule and not the exception. And I don't have the answers for everything. So, and one of the things that I've done in my career is worked cooperatively with people from, natural allies to non-natural allies, and made them allies. And so what I would like to do is to sit down with people who, I have my lane, but I want to sit down with people like you who have more information and who have more knowledge and work out solutions. Address the problems that we have honestly and find real solutions to them. I can't do it by myself, and I don't know everything by myself, but the intention is to make sure that our kids don't get, our kids with special needs don't get entrapped in a criminal justice system. Frankly, it's to make sure all of our kids don't get entrapped, because 90% of the kids that come into the criminal justice system are victims of trauma themselves. And so instead of asking what's wrong with you and charging a kid, we should be asking what services do you need to make you whole and to put you on the right track.
Hi, I think this is a good segue, and also building on the question that this woman asked earlier about building the relationship with the community. Are you open to, outside of town halls, open to having community advisory boards, and how would they look like, and how would you utilize that?
I would love to have a community advisory board, actually, and it's something that I've been exploring. I don't know what it would look like yet, but I know that there are organizations that are training the reform prosecutors, and I would look to them to try to figure out how to do it. I would look to the county board to figure out how to do it, but I would like to have a community advisory board as well.
So a lot of people, not many people know this, but in Arlington County, if you're arrested for anything, you're more than twice as likely to end up with a felony conviction as you are if you're arrested in Fairfax, and almost as twice as likely to end up with a felony conviction as if you're arrested in Alexandria. Do you think, my question is about prosecutorial discretion, with prosecutors having more and more leverage and more power to disenfranchise people and to give them felony convictions, do you think that, is there a need for more compassion and empathy in the exercise of discretion in Arlington?
Absolutely. One of the things that happens is when somebody is arrested, charges are stacked, multiple overlapping charges. And what it does is it makes the outcome of the case look extraordinarily bleak. And what it causes is for people to plead guilty early. And it's a blunt tool. And the criminal justice system as a general matter is a blunt tool. And we shouldn't be using it to solve all of our social problems. And I think part of the reason why we have the problem that we have is because we're using it too frequently for things that it's not appropriate for, and when we use it, it comes down hard. There is no restraint. And I would like to create a system that is much more cooperative, where people are charged with restraint, discovery is handed over to attorneys so that there is no trial by ambush. And, I think doing that will actually end up, and the data shows that ends up actually making the system more efficient. And the side benefit of that is that people are not locked up for decades, disproportionate to what they actually did. Mackenzie.
Yeah, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and one of the most important things we need in order to give a fair defense, in order to be prepared to go to trial and represent our clients well, is the police reports. And because by looking at the police reports, we can drill down to what the details of the allegations are and be prepared for trial. And what happens in Arlington is you can't have the police reports. Other jurisdictions give you the police reports. In Arlington, you have to go to the office, sit down, bring your pencil and paper, and write down from the police reports, because you're not allowed to have a copy. Further, as you start to write down the thing you need, you realize it's been redacted. So there's nothing in the police reports of any value to a criminal defense lawyer, which adds to this feeling of trial by ambush. So I'm wondering, Parisa, what will you do about police reports?
Well, I would have an open file discovery that is truly open file. It gives electronic copies. Give over everything that's permitted by law. And if there is a true safety issue, seek a protective order. I work under protective orders all the time, where I receive documents that I don't share with clients. But I receive them from the government, and it helps me work my case. There's no reason why in extreme cases where there are sort of dangers that the same thing couldn't be done in Arlington.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Amina, and I am I'm a supporter of Parisa, but I do have a question for you I'm hoping you can speak to. One of the popular things, at least what I've heard from your opponent, is that often the numbers that we see in difference in African Americans being arrested and in jail here in Arlington County is because of folks that are coming into town who are out-of-towners. Forgive me if you've spoken to this, but what do you think of that? It bothers me in some ways because it feeds into this general idea that Virginia, one, is not a friendly place to African Americans, which is a historical truth overall, and two, even if it isn't true, is it right? And so, please, if you could speak to it.
I guess my question would be, why are we, since there are white people coming from other jurisdictions also, why are we locking up so many black people disproportionately from the other jurisdictions?
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm also a supporter of Parisa, and I work with Chris at Spread the Vote. And just anecdotally, we work with all of those people in the homeless shelter, most of whom are nonviolent criminals, many of whom are parents who have not been able to pay fines, that can't drive to their job, all of the things. We see it, and it is, I would say, an overwhelming majority of African-American people there. So anecdotally, whether there's statistics or not, and they're all from Arlington, we're helping them get IDs. They're all in the system. So anecdotally, that's just not true. But I also want to just say another anecdotal thing is that living in North Arlington, I am having a hard time getting all of these supposedly, like you said, very liberal white people with all of these very liberal signs in their yards to even hear me out about a different Commonwealth's attorney, because Theo's their friend and has been in the school system for so many years. I mean, even the Westover Beer Garden, who's supposedly very liberal, is supporting Theo. So we are going to need to get the word out more about Parisa and people, because this is a historically low voting race. So just even from the work we're doing, we care very much about this race. So it is important to get as many people to know about Parisa as we can. No question.
So bring 10 friends and go canvassing.
And also go vote and bring 10 friends.
So I have another question for you, Parisa. Like I said, I grew up in Knock, Green Valley, and one of the issues that we've had over years, over the decades, is over-policing in Knock. Over-policing of youth in Knock, particularly around like Pentagon City Mall, Johnson Hill / Arlington View. And I just want to hear a little more about how you plan to, I don't want to use the word manage, but have like how you envision that relationship between the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office and ACPD and the communities where the over-policing has been an issue for decades.
Well, I mean, the first thing is I plan to sit down and have a conversation. I think hearing from the community that this is happening makes it undeniable. And, you know, letting everything out into the sunlight makes it undeniable, so that we can actually then start coming up with solutions, whether that means, you know, restraint, you know, exercising restraint in policing, maybe being more spend more on community policing, maybe spend more, you know, allocate our resources differently, so away from prisons and towards after-school programs and community centers. I think all of these are things that need to be on the table, and we need to sit down with all of the stakeholders to figure out what the solutions are. And you know, we're more likely to get progress and reallocation for prevention if we work cooperatively.
How you doing? My name is Wayne. I'm a great supporter of Ms. Parisa myself. I have a question. For those were convicted of drugs or criminalization of marijuana or cocaine or whatever the case may be, would you have a program set up for those individuals when they get out, as far as getting their voting rights back together? Because me, myself, I'm a convicted felon. I got out. I never knew what avenue to take to get my voting rights back until I met this gentleman at the barbershop, Kelvin. But I just want to know, do y'all having a program set up for individuals like that? Because these people they're getting locked up, being convicted, but they're being misguided. When they get out, they don't know which way to go. And 9 times out of 10, the probation officer is not guiding them in the right direction. So maybe, you know, we won't have a lot of repeated offensive. Maybe if they guide it in the right direction. And
wouldn't it be easier if we just didn't take away voting rights to begin with?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, we need to work on that. We need to work with nonprofits. We need to work with the state. We need to make it easier. I mean, Terry McAuliffe figured out how to do it. There's no reason why everybody else can't figure it out. And if we, you know, what really gets me with the disenfranchisement is not just the origin of the laws, but that folks who are in prison are actually counted in the census. And so you get rural communities that have a lot of incentive to build prisons, and then they fill them with bodies, and they count those bodies towards their representation in Richmond. But those people don't get to vote. So either people should be allowed to vote where they are, or they should be counted for the census, I mean, in the community that they're from. But, I mean, the easiest solution is to just not take away the franchise.
So I have a couple of comments. One is I'm a special education attorney, and so I want to, Kia, I think it is, hi, was asking about data, and I met recently with Earl Conklin and Court Services to ask about data, about the school referrals, and it is not collected in a way that's easy to analyze, and so that is a massive project, and unless we have some kind of systemic changes in the way we collect the data, we're not going to have that answer anytime soon. That's number one. Number two, on the over-policing, I also have a concern about under-policing, and I think this may, be one of the factors that's going on in the county. We have a significant issue at certain schools related to drug abuse and addiction. We had a completed suicide at one of those schools recently. Children are being criminalized very readily for minor drug infractions, and that is probably not helping with the anxiety there, but one of the things that I've heard in the community, including members of law enforcement, no one in this room currently, just to be clear, is that there may be a reticence on the part of police to actually pursue cases in wealthier neighborhoods with wealthier defendants because it's harder to prosecute those people. Now, if that's happening, then part of the explanation for why people don't understand this as a problem is because they're just not experiencing that problem. And that's part of an embedded disparity.
AKA our kids at Wakefield are getting sent down to the courthouse, and Yorktown is getting slapped on the wrist for the same type of infraction. That has to stop.
So I just wanted to add to that comment. So I've been in Arlington County for 32 years. I spent 18 years working in the sheriff's office, in corrections and other positions. And I can tell you that the current office holder's position is, well, she can't control who the police arrest. And that is simply not true. Because if she exercises her discretion, the police would then respond to that. If you choose not to prosecute someone, the police will quit arresting those people. So it's not a chicken or the egg question. Is that elected official has a choice. And she's made her choice very clear that priorities are not people who don't look, I don't want to personalize this, but who don't look like the majority. And so as a Commonwealth's attorney, I think you would have a choice. What I hear you saying is that you would exercise that choice to consider all people equally across the board. If I'm wrong, please let me know.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, my preference is to sit down and have a conversation and, come up with an arrangement and an agreement beforehand. But yes, I would not prosecute low-level marijuana possession charges, and I would use my discretion. I mean, adultery is illegal in Virginia. It's a misdemeanor. We don't prosecute that. There's discretion that's exercised every single day with who to divert, who to charge, how much to charge them, what to charge them with, how to plea bargain. The discretion is exercised every single day, and I would exercise my discretion with restraint in order to make sure that people's lives are not inextricably destroyed. The judges play a role as well. I'm going to kick this to the people who are practicing in this county every single day. And I'm going to ask you, how much discretion does the prosecutor have here?
So it's well known, I think in this day and age, the prosecutor is the most powerful single individual in any local justice system, and that's the most true in Alexandria or Arlington of any of the local jurisdictions, and I actually just ran these numbers today. So they often measure something called the trial penalty, which basically means how much are prosecutors threatening defendants to take plea deals. They measure this trial penalty by what percentage of felony convictions are resulting from guilty pleas, or like plea bargains. So in Alexandria, it's 91.3% of charges are guilty pleas. In Fairfax County and Loudoun County, it's 92.5%. In Arlington County, it's 97.5% of felony convictions are obtained from guilty pleas. That's mind-blowing. It's higher than even the federal system. And that tells you exactly how much power that they're exercising, how much they are threatening and coercing and forcing people essentially to take plea deals so they can avoid having their lives ruined. And it's really, I think it says a lot about the priorities of the current Commonwealth Attorney. So, I mean, that's just data. You know, people can talk all they want, but that is what the figures are showing in Arlington.
I'm Frank Webb, I'm a criminal defense attorney. To speak to your question in terms of Parisa's power as a Commonwealth attorney in crafting what punishment there might be and how much discretion the judge has, in Virginia, on a felony, you're sentenced by a circuit court judge. You know that well, but for everybody who doesn't know, let me just describe this for everybody who doesn't know. So before you go before that judge for a sentencing, you've either entered a plea or you've had a trial. Now, what counts and what charges you're going to be sentenced on is a function of what charges the Commonwealth brought. So if the Commonwealth elected to indict you on 15 grand larcenies, your guidelines are going to be a product of those numbers of counts, and then there's going to be a low end of the guidelines and a high end of the guidelines. And there's usually an argument. They're asking for different points of the guidelines or above the guidelines, and the judge just says, I sentence you within the guidelines, or I will make an upward departure or a lower departure. But that entire guidelines conversation is already been set as a stage by the Commonwealth Attorney's decisions about what charges to make. Now, in some jurisdictions, a Commonwealth Attorney will make an agreement with you. I will say your client can plead guilty, and we will agree to a cap at the low end of the guidelines, or agree to probation. So once the prosecutor makes that agreement with you on the plea deal, the judge actually loses the discretion unless they reject the deal outright. And if a judge rejects a deal outright, they have to then recuse themselves, and you then go to a different judge, and that judge may accept the deal. But the deal becomes binding if the Commonwealth attorneys agreed that this is what the appropriate sentence is. So the prosecutors can decide the range by the number of counts, and they can actually also make a binding agreement with the defendant that this is what we want as a punishment.
Does that answer your question? I was supposed to do less of the talking tonight.
So it sounds like a lot of what you want to do is going to require a major cultural shift in Arlington's justice system, like with several stakeholders, the police, the courts, whoever else is involved. So what's kind of your plan of attack on how you're going to guide that shift?
Well, I plan on talking to everybody and sort of exercising that to the extent that we can work together, then I want to do that. To the extent that I have to exercise discretion, I will do that. But culture shifts slowly, and trust needs to be earned. And I am aware of all of those things. And I have always conducted myself in a cooperative and fair fashion. I've always been honest with everybody that I've worked with, and I intend to do no different as the Commonwealth's attorney.
I learned something the first time I heard you speak, which was about, what am I talking about? Right, collateral consequences. If you don't know what they are for someone who's getting out of prison, ask. It's horrendous. I didn't know anything about it. I've lived here for 40 years. I'm an adult, as you can see. There's a lot I learned at that first session, and I'm learning more tonight. But that is a humdinger. You've got to find out what are those collateral consequences of incarceration. Thanks.
So collateral consequences are, oh, sorry, you want to go?
It's about that.
Sorry?
It's about the last topic.
Oh, okay, well, very quickly, collateral consequences are the things that follow you around after a conviction. And Wayne, you were kind enough to share your story. I feel like coming from you, talking about some of the barriers that you faced going back into the community would be useful. Wayne.
Again, hello, my name is Wayne. I'm a convicted felon. For me, myself, I got out at that time when I was incarcerated, I was younger. I didn't have an understanding why I was there, but I knew I was there. When I got out from being incarcerated, I was sentenced to a program in Richmond, Virginia called Rubicon. Well, they taught me in Rubicon selling drugs is just as worse as using drugs. So when I got out, I officially left Richmond. I came back to my favorite community, which is Arlington County. I had to make a conscious decision which avenue did I want to take. Did I want to go back down this avenue and try to sell a drug a different way to get money, or just do it the right way? Well, I met this young lady right here, Leslie Ford, God first, then her, and she said, well, listen, because behind every great man is a great woman. And I strongly say that because she helped form my life, to transform my life to where I'm at today. Today, again, I would say it proudly, I'm a convicted felon, but I'm a successful convicted felon. I own a barbershop. I'm trying to obtain more barbershops. So my perception of life is totally different now for me. My way of walking is totally different. For me to be in this room tonight is totally different for me. I remember one time I wouldn't even have the courage or the understanding to come in here and try to support whomever. And today I'm here. So the question that I had asked you earlier, I really needed that. I really needed to know the answer, because a lot of guys, which I went up to the Arlington County Detention Center a few months back, and I spoke with the inmates in there. And I said, well, listen, if I change, you can change. But a lot of inmates don't have a stepping stone to step out onto. They need support from people like us, you. People like you. Because when you stand up here and you make these strong gestures to the community, they are looking forward and seeing you again if you are voted in. You understand? And that's where I'm at with that. I'm a little nervous up here, but hey, it is what it is.
But some of the collateral consequences are the inability to get certified for certain licenses, the inability to vote, to serve on a jury, to run for office, housing restrictions, inability to get housing assistance, deportation, that's a big one. Even for simple marijuana possession, you can get deported. Great. So there was a story that went, case that went to trial, a full trial, jury trial in Arlington in November, and it was a simple marijuana possession case. The defense had asked the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office to break down the charges to something lower than marijuana possession, than the possession, that it would have had the same range of punishment. Or obviously to drop the charges, and that the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office said they can't do it because their supervisors won't let them. The prosecutor said that. It went to a full jury trial, so you're talking about multiple court dates before a jury trial. Then you're talking about a whole bunch of us, like everybody in this room, going to the courthouse, sitting on, waiting to get picked for the jury panel, 13 of you sitting on the jury. So basically that's all day. And for this marijuana possession case. And the jury found the defendant guilty, asked the judge, because in Virginia, the jury recommends a sentence, asked the judge, what's the lowest sentence we can give? And the judge said it was a fine of $1. And that is what the jury gave. And now the gentleman has immigration consequences. But, you know, I think it was 12 of the 13 jurors had said that they thought that marijuana should be legalized. But that is where our money is being spent right now. And I think that that's just immoral. I don't know a year, but I think in the last 6 years it's been about 3,200. Brad?
I just wanted to chime in. There was a question that was asked about how, you know, with all these different stakeholders and some being resistant to change potentially, just to shed some light on the way things are right now, because I don't really, myself, being involved in, or being a criminal defense attorney, I don't think that there are actually going to be too many people to convince that there's a better way of doing things. If you think about who are the stakeholders in the Arlington criminal justice system, you have the sheriff. Sheriff Beth Arthur is generally known to be very progressive. She's very open to things like having advanced mental health services in her jail. She's not interested in having that jail full of inmates. Their forensic team, the people who work with mentally ill inmates and substance addicted inmates, is literally the best in this area. And they work in conjunction with the Department of Human Services, which again, in my experience, is the very best in Northern Virginia, probably one of the best in the state. It's a model agency. They've been trying together to have a mental health court for the last 15 years. There have been impediments to that. People want Arlington to be a laboratory for things like compassionate programs for the type of criminal justice that can actually help people be rehabilitated rather than setting their lives back. And actually, we have judges too. We have 2 new general district court judges that are just starting, both of whom are well known for their compassion and sort of their progressive ideals and interests for the future of the courthouse. Even our existing judges in the circuit court, they're problem solvers. Whether they're tough in trial or not, they're all well known to be problem solvers. They want to give defendants chances to get their lives together, to get their addiction issues treated, things of that nature. And even now, the police department, I've always have, myself in my practice, I've always had good relationships with police officers. And you find that the police officers, when you have them be focused on the crimes that really matter instead of having to bother with the little stuff, the stuff that is, whatever. I think that they feel better about their jobs. And in addition, now the police department is becoming more open to things like crisis intervention training. So understanding that mental illness is not a criminal offense. I think it's now the police department is up to close to 75% of their officers are CIT trained, crisis intervention trained. So they know how to deal with our substantial population of Arlingtonians who have serious mental illness. So like I said, you have a community here that's ready to move forward, that so many people are on the same page and want this to be really almost like a laboratory for modern, contemporary, effective, evidence-based criminal justice policy. So I don't really think it's going to be that hard for Parisa to get people all on the same page in that regard. In fact, I think it's a real opportunity.
But there is that tension there, right? It's that there seems to be, she's been an incumbent for quite a while now, and there seems to be a comfortableness. And I keep thinking about your comment, Miss, where you talked about, yes, these are interesting ideas, but I get to my north side neighbors and they're saying, well, we're happy. And I understand why they might be happy in some ways, because they may not see themselves as ever having to come across or deal with or be involved with the criminal justice system in a negative way. If anything, they feel as though it is precisely there to protect them. And so I'm trying to, and as well, because I feel very grateful that you're running. I feel very grateful that you have the mentality and the ethic and the worldview that you have, that you're bringing to this position is so needed. But bridging the gap and turning to a North Arlingtonian, and that's not to say all of them, but there's a reason why Theo's winning and winning as much as they are. My question is, what will convince these folks to say, well, you know, perhaps I'm not going to be mistreated, but there are folks out there who are being mistreated. Or perhaps this is a waste of money. Perhaps we are wasting funds. You know, perhaps I'm still unconvinced that they actually would like to see change. And what is the language that we need to speak to them in to make them understand that?
Hi, my name's Heather, and I have absolutely no answers to anything, and I'm nobody. I stay at home and I volunteer at the shelter with Chris, but I keep sharing the stories of the people that we are with, and that's the only thing I know to do that really blows people away. I mean, some of the conversations that people were talking about, like the gentleman over here who was convicted of his felony when he was young, so many of the people in these shelters committed these crimes when they were in their 20s, and half the time it was something like declaring unemployment for too long, and they get a felony conviction, and now they can't vote, they can't pay their bills, they're in this homeless shelter, and the waste of money convicting marijuana that could be, half the reason we're there volunteering is we shouldn't even actually be there because there are caseworkers that should be helping them get an ID, but there's no money, there's like one caseworker for hundreds of people, and so they rely on people to go in there every day and walk people down. And it sounds silly walking people down to the DMV even, and I'm often embarrassed, but me going there with them to the DMV helps them get an ID. And if they go without me, 9 times out of 10, they don't get it. And I think it is probably based on the color of my skin. I mean, I think it is 100% based on, so the only thing I know to do is to keep telling these stories. I don't feel like anyone's listening to me in North Arlington, which is why I want the rest of the community to come out and vote, because then maybe the culture shifts that way. Maybe once she becomes Commonwealth attorney, then maybe the culture shifts from the top down versus the bottom. That's the only thing I know to do. So.
Well, I was just going to say, if we can get together some stories, some of your stories, I think that's what we need to do, is to get some real life facts about what's going on and let the community know.
I think one other thing too that we can do, I've been in Arlington for decades. I could be Heather's mom. We work together well, but I could be her mom. I've always voted. I knew Commonwealth's attorney was on the ballot, but I never thought about what is a Commonwealth's attorney? What is their job? What do they do here in Arlington? So I never really paid much attention to it, but now I realize how much power they have over people's lives in our community and beyond. And I think we need to let other people know, hey, this is on the ballot. What do you know about the Commonwealth's attorney and what they do? And we need to tell people this is an important, very important election, and tell them why.
I wanted to respond too. That lady who asked, is the incumbent the one who's getting in the way of a mental health court when everyone else wants to do it and maybe she doesn't? And Brad didn't answer it definitively. The thing is that the Commonwealth attorney not only has power in terms of what they can do in terms of charges and bail reform and all that, but within the courthouse itself, Commonwealth's attorneys are more listened to than the criminal defense lawyers because we stand in the defendant's shoes. So it's like, the Commonwealth's attorney is the one the judges turn to, the probation office. Everybody who can make these things happen listens to the Commonwealth's attorney more than anyone else. So the Commonwealth's attorney, it really matters. If it were pushed for, it would probably happen. So that's why we need somebody who's progressive in there, because it matters not only to the outside world, but to what happens in the courthouse.
Are there plans for a debate at all?
There are several debates scheduled in April.
Does anybody, maybe a couple more questions?
I'm aware of a diversion program in Fairfax County for first-time offender shoplifters. And they can take this diversion program, but it means that they have this on their record, the arrest on their record. And if you have money, you can go to court and, what do you say, expunge? Is that what it's called? Get it expunged, whatever. You can get that off your record. Could you talk about, because you mentioned diversion programs, how you would structure things like that in Arlington that would be less onerous for folks?
Right, so I would continue cases so that people don't actually have to plead guilty, and work on changing the law so that people don't have to plead to anything in order to end up without a conviction. And I would also support laws that would automatically expunge arrests when people have successfully completed diversion programs and when their cases have been dismissed.
That just reminded me of one more thing. Sorry to talk again. I was not trying to talk a lot tonight. I often talk a lot. But the felony, did you touch on that already? The felony, how she voted against raising the felony limit, the current Commonwealth's attorney?
Well, so, I mean, the felony larceny threshold was raised last year from $200 to $500, and my opponent takes credit for that.
Remember, 200 was what it was for a long time.
So 200, but the legislature actually wanted to raise it to 1,000, and she and the Virginia Association of Commonwealth's Attorneys fought to lower that legislation to 500. So she didn't actually, despite taking credit for it, raise it $300. In effect, she lowered it 500.
And the other discretion is, so that's an iPhone. That's if a 14-year-old steals my iPhone, she can also choose to charge that 14-year-old as an adult, and she also has the discussion of which color of person is charged with the felony and which color is not. Trying to say things.
And I can attest to that, having to go to the jail to assess people who are threatening to commit suicide, and they've stolen a shirt from Pentagon City Mall. And that was that shirt for $205. They hit that threshold, and they are being charged with a felony. Any more questions? One more?
500, by the way, is one of the lowest in the country. So it is among the lowest in the country.
Hi. Yesterday I was talking to someone who wasn't going to support you, said if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I said, it is broke. I think the point is to tell people about the bad things that you read in the papers about other jurisdictions are also happening in Arlington. I think that's really the point, because everybody knows from the newspapers who reads it all that there's a lot of bad things in systems all over the country. And people just have to be told that Arlington is one of those. It's just not in their neighborhood necessarily.
Exactly. And this is also, it's happening in Arlington just as much as it's happening everywhere else, if not more. There's no transparency to prove it unless you've been in those shoes. So there's no data being collected from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office about who they're prosecuting, about what they're prosecuting, about who's getting diverted, about which kids are being charged as prosecuted with felonies and which kids are not. And even the sort of based on what cases are being pursued based on the profile of the victim. I mean, are people of color not having their cases prosecuted? And this has nothing to do with the police. This has everything to do with like the decisions that are made in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. We don't know the answers to those because there's no data that's collected. And there are organizations and agencies that will come in and analyze the data and tell you what's going on in the office and give you recommendations for best practices. But that no study has been done in this office. So, yes, yes, nope. So, I mean, the first thing I would want to do is to go in and get one of these organizations that works with the federal government and get the data collected so we know what's been going on and continue, create systems where we can keep data and share it so that we can be honest with the community about what's happening.
And to that point about data, we have the president of the NAACP for Arlington here, and we were at the last meeting, and I just wanted you to share real quickly about some of the data that you got back that was skewed a little bit.
So my name is Julius. I'm the president of the Arlington branch NAACP. So over the past couple years, we have sat down with the chief of police and looked over some of the numbers as it pertains to arrest people of color. And I will tell you this, there's been significant disparities that we have seen and we've addressed with the chief of police and his staff. So for what it's worth, you just need to know that the NAACP is also looking into these matters and heavily engaged with the law enforcement and chief of police office here in Arlington.
All right, and we're going to do one more, and then Parisa will let you give your closing remarks, and Nicole will wrap us up.
I just wanted to say, as the son of a Latin American immigrant, I don't know if you guys know this, but Hispanic people are charged and categorized and kept in the white column in Virginia. So we don't know how many Latinos are being charged disproportionately to whites because they're just kind of lumped in with the white category. So there's a lot of data to be collected, and it's not being collected.
And so it makes it, that data that came back that Julius was mentioning, it makes it look like they were looking at this and saying, no, this is not correct. And that's where we found out that the Latinos were being categorized as white, so then it was skewed to make it look like it was even across the board, and that was not the case. Parisa, you want to give us some closing remarks?
Yeah, sure. This is, as Chris said, a very important election. We are starting to finally have honest conversations about the criminal justice system. We have a ton of data from the last 10 years of organization after organization looking at what actually makes our community safer, and the answers are that getting rid of cash bail makes our community safer. Diversion programs make our community safer. Treatment programs make our community safer. And the 1980s war on drug mentality has gotten us to where we are with a system that costs more money every year, that, a system that we're funding at a higher pace than we're funding education, and a system that's resulted in 1 out of every 3 black men predicted going to prison. We deserve better than that. And this is not about soft on crime, tough on crime. It's not about left-wing or right-wing politics. This is about somebody who has spent 20 years fixing the system's problems, identifying how the system can be better, and pushing for reform, versus somebody who has been doing the same thing for 32 years and has built the system that we have today and is in no position to see what's wrong with it, much less fix it. So I'm asking for your support, obviously, but I want this to be the beginning of a lot of conversations. I hope that when I become the next Commonwealth's attorney, that we will meet here over and over and over again, and that each one of you feels comfortable coming into my office to talk to me about what concerns you, and to ask me for evidence, and for proof, and for transparency and accountability, because that is what we deserve. And we should be leading on all of these issues. We are the most educated, the most prosperous community, certainly in the area, in the country. There is no reason why we cannot be leading on these issues. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Parisa. This was a great conversation. Thank you all for coming tonight. And as Parisa said, the conversation continues. Like, we need to go back to our communities, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers. This election is critical. And as Parisa said, we know that progressive ideas work. We've seen it work across the country. There's no reason why they can't work here in Arlington. So continue the conversations. If you want to get involved, there's plenty of ways to get involved to help Parisa. And thank you all for coming tonight. Have a good night. Thank you again.